Hey everybody, it's Kathy Bosco from Rethink.fm, the forward-thinking podcast about experience design. Join me and special guests to discuss effective design, technology, and the intersection of helping people and entrepreneurship. From user experience research to product roadmaps, we've got you covered. We've all got questions, so let's get started. Today, my special guest is Jessica Talisman. She's well known for her work around the ontology pipeline, metadata standards, semantic knowledge systems, taxonomy, like I said, ontology and knowledge graphs. Let's go. Welcome, Jessica. Thank you for being my special guest today. Maybe to kick things off, you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the important work that you're doing.
So my name's Jessica Talisman, obviously, and I am here. I am an information architect, although I'm also a semantic engineer, taxonomist, ontologist, knowledge graph engineer. I don't think that the industry has completely landed on titles within the information science or library science space, obviously outside of being a librarian. I've worked in the space domain since 1997, but did get my master's in information and library science a little bit later. I didn't go back to school until I was a single mom, 2016, and put myself back through school while working as a director of library service at an art college. I'd been working actively in the field, and so I became very familiar with some of the struggles that enterprises face when trying to implement information architectures and knowledge graphs, joining the forces of the corporate world in 2018. And I really saw a need to bring some librarian practices into enterprise spaces because of issues like findability and interoperability, making things discoverable. And so it's not necessarily just front end type work. I have to admit, like, I'm not a wonderful front end designer. That's not my wheelhouse. Really work in the space of infrastructure and semantic engineering. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Really seeing the need, and the need for expertise in your area is just compounded with AI, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's been like a major issue, and it's even more of a global issue because of AI. And we'll see, there's a lot of talk with AI bubble bursting, but there's also a lot of discussion around what do we need to ensure accuracy and reliability from AI systems. And this includes preventing or minimizing hallucinations, keeping things specific to domains and domain language, domain semantics. Really about creating like a profile for your business so that AI systems are able to not only train on enterprise data or domain specific data, but also, implementations like rig and reg, which some say are going in or out at any given moment, and and being able to expand and grow AI systems and agents. I write quite a bit on these topics, and I'm also in the process of writing a book called Intentional Arrangement, which will be out in 2026, where I talk exactly about these issues. It's only now because of AI that all of a sudden we're having this panic of none of our information and knowledge is structured or organized. And that reality, in fact, is something that needs to exist, the organization of information with or without AI. If all lights went out tomorrow, ideally, our information systems and knowledge infrastructures are able to survive, and continue to build, grow, scale, prosper in any digital environment.
Yeah, I see that in enterprise work a lot. I see multiple knowledge bases that are siloed off, that don't work cross-functionally with each other. So this is our first chance to really have a conversation and get into the weeds a little bit. And I'm so excited to talk to you. Uh, I'd love to learn from you a little bit about the differences and the importance of in the ontology pipeline of taxonomy and how that relates to in the in knowledge graph kind of thing. I work in UX research, so I'm looking at customer insights and findings and trying to make internally making that all discoverable. So we're all pulling on the same rope towards the same flag. So I have like this little working example that I'm learning about knowledge graphs through a lot of the work that you're promoting and writing about. So would you mind talking a little bit about taxonomy and
Sure.
data quality and defining taxonomies?
Yes. I created the ontology pipeline as a framework, and you can even think of it as a life cycle. I've been sort of vacillating back and forth, like, pipeline makes sense because it's iterative steps. But the idea of the ontology pipeline is to help to codify actual measurable states or steps where we can iteratively build upon base or foundational structures, such as, like, for example, starting with a controlled vocabulary. So we start with a controlled vocabulary because we need to know what words or terms or concepts are qualified within our space to describe things. We also, that's part of, as you said, the data cleaning aspect and data quality aspect is baked into the ontology pipeline. Because in order to create a controlled vocabulary, which is basically your list of words, you have to go through reconciliation and defining, just that exercise of figuring out what things are and what they mean. That gives you an opportunity to reconcile acronyms, synonyms, so that you don't end up with duplicates or very noisy ecosystems. And from that controlled vocabulary, we mature systems even further and structure them into a hierarchy, which is parent-child relations. We can relate on the front end into UX, a hierarchy existing in navigation or browse menus, or sitemaps. And whether people think that sitemaps matter anymore, they actually still do, especially with AI. Um, and really helping customers be able to find find what they're looking for. But the other aspect of that is in architecting these systems, like you said, threading the front end, connecting it. We can think of that as full stack information architecture, because there is a distinction where you have front end and back end. And just browsing, I have a term that I came up with a few months ago, that just organizing things on the front end without connecting them to the structure on the back end is like stirring the clouds. You're not going to make an impact, and you're not going to help the cause of findability for humans or machines if it simply exists on the front end and isn't connected to some structured iteration or development or view or architecture that's actually connecting and defining things in machine readable format. And that's what's key.
Right, those systems need to be speaking the same language as well. And
Yes.
I often try to point out to, because it takes a lot of work to get a whole organization speaking the same
Mhm.
language, right? I often try to start with like, how do customers talk about it?
Yes.
Let's use that language first. Then let's talk about how to improve that. We can go towards how do customer facing teams talk about it?
Yes.
And then we can move into, okay, where is that actually happening in our code bases and things like that?
Yeah.
If you can go through those three steps, you can begin to get closer to defining them, creating the hierarchy, like that parent-child relationship. And it's about internal wiring more than, for me in my work, it's been more about the internal wiring than it is about the navigation in a marketing website or a product.
Exactly. And that's what's interesting. I recently left Adobe to go out on my own. So I'm creating courses and I'm consulting and coaching around the ontology pipeline, helping to teach people how to build these structures. Um, and because the data quality aspect is baked into all of the stages and phases, It's a constant sort of care, tending, and feeding of these systems as well. So when I was at Adobe, Adobe is basically, almost 40 products under a corporate umbrella. And it's not unlike other companies. It's a pretty common tale is that through a series of acquisitions, you end up having sort of this umbrella, the corporate umbrella, but in fact, it's individual products with their own domains and languages held within that corporate umbrella. And so a lot of us in these corporate environments are dealing with sort of generations and different iterations or ways of saying things. And then brand and marketing often will come up with really cool, awesome ways of phrasing things like, or a specific methodology or themes around how we brand and describe things. And one of the issues that organizations commonly face is like, well, how do I hold space, for lack of a better word, for brand and marketing to have their splashy marketing lingo and brand identity while maintaining rich semantics or meaning. So, for example, across Adobe, every single product has the term architecture or access or, Gen AI. But contextually within each of the products, that meaning can change or can be different. And
Right.
the gap can be huge. So there are little tricks of the trade. For example, when you build these semantic systems, you can actually have a single term or concept, you have to think about it more abstractly, can have an identifier. And with that identifier, you can have a display label, a preferred label, a hidden label. You can host multiple semantic labels that all resolve to one single concept that has one single meaning. So the real gold in architecting these systems is being able to have stability in the back end and disambiguate the meaning of concepts while allowing for flexibility on the front end, so that the language can be threaded throughout.
So it all maps through a shared understanding or a shared language.
Shared language, and then being able then to use that back end system if you have concept A and concept B and they each have their own unique identifiers but multiple iterations or terms or labels or whatever you want to say that account for that single concept of architecture. It could be, architecture. The preferred label might be software architecture, and then there could be children that branch off from there. But you can connect then and create rich relationships between, even parent-child relationships are a type of relationship. So when we talk about context and meaning, the beauty for AI systems and what this does for AI systems is simple parent-child relations supports inference. And that's one of the key mechanisms that helps with contextualization or context engineering
Mhm.
for AI are these simple parent-child relations. Because inference tells us that if you have architecture, say that you have just the word architecture and a child of architecture, software architecture, another child at the same level as platform architecture, by way of that, you can assume that platform architecture and software architecture, that a machine can infer that architecture is the more global way of describing those things, right? So
Mhm.
we want to support traversal of a tree, being able to climb up the tree and go down the tree and add rich context.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. If your brain works this way, it really gets you excited. If your brain doesn't work this way, it can be overwhelming.
It can
And
be very overwhelming.
some of the challenges I've seen, I'd love to hear some of the challenges you're seeing teams have is aligning the data catalog
Yes.
with it and also engineering product hierarchy. So really, you need the whole thing working in an orchestrated way together. And when's the right time to get coordinated? And how long should that take? And any challenges you've seen with that, or am I
I
overcomplicating it?
Not at all. I mean, it is a challenge. That's a primary challenge because that speaks again to, oh, we've allowed these different product teams to have autonomy in their language and the way that they're describing things. Like that, I would say that's pre-AI sort of the norm. And now we're being pushed to task to really start thinking about these things because it's really important, especially the concept of like agentic workflows. That's something that is going to require, or, even something as simple as linking between sites, concepts between sites, like front end sites. That's another example. Or being able to account and reconcile vocabulary across products, that this is
Right.
the equivalent to this, but this is different than that. Those simple challenges have been highlighted. They're being extracted and brought to the surface because it's been a barrier to progressing with AI systems for reliability and accuracy and agentic AI, for example, which I am still very apprehensive of. But with the product teams, I think a lot of people's challenges have been trying to put their finger on exactly what those points of integrations are or how these systems should network. And that's the key, is that we're really looking at that point at networked architectures. The architectures where you're trying to network across the languages across or the vocabularies across a multi-product space, it's as much a social contract as it is a technical contract agreement.
Right.
And we can fight about language all day. Whether we want to acknowledge it or not, language can be very political. Um,
And it
yeah,
requires some governance, right? We need like
governance.
ways embedded for us to make changes. It reminds me of uh trust. So trust must be earned when you're doing business with if I'm going to buy a product, I have to be able to trust that it's secure, it's performant, it's responsive, the support's going to be there when I need it. It has to be earned, but it also has to be maintained,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And we talk a lot about trust on the podcast, and this sort of reminds me of that. Only we definitely need the governance, like a
Yes.
group of people meeting every quarter to decide new definitions, new semantics, because
Yes.
there's so much downstream impact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's so and I think for lack, like what I observe time and time again in systems is the communication tools. Like we don't surprisingly have, we can say Slack, we can say Jira tickets, right? Like there's like these sort of known ways of interacting with each other at scale. But we don't have really great organic communication tools beyond those two avenues. So, what I often do, because that trust building has everything to do with communication and how we communicate and what levers you have to pull to transfer messaging, it goes back to linked systems. So, there's two things that I think are important here. Number one is I always like to build internal applications that serve as a glossary, data catalog, whatever you want to call it. There has to be something where the least technical and the most technical people can all interface with the same UI in order to view a vocabulary, get a sense of the structure, and then give feedback. It's that simple. Oftentimes, some of these interfaces can be overly complex or overly technical. So, your marketing and brand folks may not have a great time interacting with those or be able to dynamically interact or make sense of the space. So, it needs to run much like a website, and then having a feedback button, because the beauty is that you can surface a glossary internal, very simple. And that's something that AI can help you do with a simple taxonomy with your definitions in a spreadsheet,
Mhm.
that you can render something that meets people's mental models of a tree or a hierarchy and have the definitions explicit. And then, so when people are giving feedback, they're giving feedback on the concept based on the concept plus the definition rather than just an implied meaning. It seems so simple, but it's so, so important, are those communication interfaces
Mhm.
internally,
Yeah.
internally.
Yeah.
The second is like metadata. So we overlook our metadata systems, and oftentimes we derive our vocabularies from one of the inputs is metadata. How do we store these things in databases? And how these labels are stored, how they're classified. This is a product, this is a feature, that's an example. So
Mhm.
there's different tag types or, buckets, so to speak. And so those metadata interchanges, that's like one of our other levers in order to reconcile vocabulary across a complex ecosystem between products, for example, is that we're able to map um, the metadata to connect or have these sort of junctions. It's very cheesy, but at Adobe, I called this sort of concept switch track.
Okay, sure.
So you think of like a train at a station and going in, and the train rotates and switches to go to another direction. But there needs to be these areas where you can reconcile terminology or concepts across an ecosystem. And it doesn't mean one term or one concept trumps the other. The idea is to have relationships that are simply same as.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same. That's it.
Yep. Yep. That gets really important when you're getting extremely cross-functional. I can
Yes.
understand that very well that way. Another thing that I found to be helpful, that needs to be maintained, from a customer insights perspective is, ownership.
Hmm.
So each of those features, if we're talking breaking it down to features, must have ownership too, so that we can centralize those insights and make them actionable in real time for roadmap prioritization.
Yes.
So ownership throughout a taxonomy needs to be maintained. That's another communication aspect, that I have found to be really critical
And
to.
versions. That's the other thing. Versioning of taxonomy is very important.
Right,
How many times do we have different versions at play? It seems very, very simple, but that's part of the governance as well.
right.
And so that, being able to communicate changes effectively and quickly. And so again, that's sort of what you're talking about is the central, what is your central communication? It's your talking stick, that we can all point to the same reference point and
Right,
have agreement or disagreement, but at least we're all looking at the same concept and the same definitions. Um,
right,
and
right.
that's often overlooked. And feedback loops. I mean,
Oh,
just huge, huge. How do people deliver feedback to you?
yes. And how do you close the loop with customers on the outside? Like, so many teams struggle to get to that point where they're closing the loop, like, hey, we did the thing, or this will create a land and expand opportunity for an organization. They get sort of stuck in,
Yes.
uh or we updated a feature, or just that continuous communication loop.
Brand or name changes, like when branding and marketing decides to change, or they decide, and this is common across enterprises, is that you'll create features that connect to products, for example, that get
Right.
capabilities from another product. You're having this sort of interleaving of different products under a corporate umbrella. And so if you're going to create these, the customer journeys is that's part of what could be the fallout or the benefit of well-governed system is that you can seamlessly incorporate these change the state of change. And that can be done using taxonomies as well.
Mhm.
And you can have triggers set up in a system. Something that I also see, though, that's even more fundamental is that a lot of the customer journeys or the way that we handle metadata and language and concepts and terminology in a space like taxonomies is only once it's live on a page. And I don't know how often you've seen that, but it's like we start the journey from the page, the web page. And that is a mistake because again, your content or whatever you're putting on the website should exist with or without any certain utility.
Mm-hmm.
Your
Mm-hmm.
base content being properly identified structured and represented, it's important to have that because its existence on a web page is essentially ephemeral, meaning
Right.
the URL can change, the site navigation could change. There's a bunch of different things at play. We could be redirects, backlinks. So you're also having to account for the content journey.
Yes. That's a big parallel to customer insights. It's a great metaphor. They have a lot of similar patterns
Yes.
in our ability to be successful there. It's a good call out. Sometimes I've had success. Well, it sounds all very analytical, but I have found, and I don't know what you find, Jessica, but I found it requires a certain amount of creativity too, because you have to be able to like you said, connect maybe a couple of features into a workflow. Maybe you produce workflows for people. And so how do you loop that into, and maybe the workflow isn't even part of the product. Maybe it's about uh, authentication logging into the product. And that's not a feature that you're promoting, but you have to be able to connect these experiences into a shared language as well. So I've had I've had some success using creativity in an architecture where like the top level is a maybe almost a whole sentence that is gathered in
Yeah.
there or a
Yeah.
fragment of a sentence to encapsulate the child things underneath it. And I think that's okay. At least it's moving you in the right direction. You can always,
And even if you have that and it's a phrase or a sentence that you're accounting for, you can still on the back end have, that no one sees. You can write no display that has the stable back end concept that's really well defined and encoded in something like SCOS, which is the simple knowledge on ontology system or organization system. I always say ontology because it's an ontology, but the idea is that structures your vocabulary and your concepts and defines your concepts. But something that I've also been thinking about and reading about quite a bit is process knowledge. I've really gone down a rabbit hole here because it's something that in the US, especially, we don't do well. Process knowledge is representing, accounting for, documenting, and structuring knowledge like workflows and documentation and like the collective tacit information that it's information that normally has been tacit.
Mhm.
And so this move to start to account for this, if you think about it in terms of what we're building, a lot of the focus in AI has been towards building workflows. That has been an identified low-hanging fruit. It's appropriate and it's a good place to insert AI, right? Because we have to look at realistically where has AI been performant and where has it not been so performant. And one of those areas is just simple helping out with workflow. So that is process knowledge. And so that introduces like a whole nother exciting and newer knowledge space, information and knowledge space that we really haven't been investing in up till now.
Fascinating. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that as part of the whole knowledge infrastructure, but it is. And sometimes it just gets lost in words and like folklore of language on how it happens as opposed to being documented and really greasing the wheels so people can move
Yes.
quickly through things.
And you think about it in terms of like if you have an ecosystem and you have like if you look at it within your ecosystem, your own corporate or enterprise type ecosystem, and this even happens with institutions, is most everywhere has hopefully a knowledge base that has documentation. That documentation sometimes can, yeah, seriously, cross fingers. You might have Confluence and Jira and those types of things. So how do you transpose those and represent those, basic workflows and account for them and define the steps and processes? It's a really exciting and newer space because one thing that has set us apart in terms of like the world, US, again, as I said, is not great at process engineering. And it really is about we're not very good at documenting how we do things.
Yeah, that's right.
how
That's
we do things. So then how does that get passed on not only to AI, but to other people? Like there's the issue of inheritance.
yeah,
This is something the library space does very well, and the primary framework for this is something called that's the ontology is the Prov ontology or Provo, which is provenance. But in library science, it's known as the Ferber method, which is the functional requirements for bibliographic records. So don't let it throw you off the bibliographic part, but it's essentially that you have a work. That work is the original work. That original work, it could be a piece of documentation, never goes away. But then if you have an expression, a manifestation, like that documentation changes or it gets put up on a different site, which would be a manifestation of that thing, you never break that chain or that lineage. You're always accounting for all of the different forms and facets of this primary information. And it seems like it's exhaustive. And why would anyone invest in this? But it's like that's what set libraries apart. That's what makes things so discoverable in a library
yeah.
environment. And that's what
If your work is not findable, it's not usable.
it's not
Like,
usable.
it's a
Yeah.
really foundational concept, right? If it's not
Yeah.
secure, it's not usable. If it's not findable,
Not usable.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And
Wow.
then, you end up with people doing really hacky things like hand mapping things or redirecting things or backlinking things. And then you end up with a wicked game of Jenga because when you do that at scale and then you end up with, hundreds of backlinks and redirects and whatever else, and then you end up with like that growing and growing and growing, and then you start to include more and more. It's an expanding, exploding problem. So the idea is to codify a system where you have versioning, that you have notifications or a way to communicate across an environment to document these changes within the system, that you can account for the lineage, that you're able to leverage those things like metadata systems or, their metadata application profiles. But essentially, it's a way to crosswalk. Crosswalking is something where you just map at a high level between the different systems to just reconcile language. It's that simple. And so I am not going to hide the fact that it's a lot of work. The other part is that unfortunately, a lot of organizations still haven't pivoted. So you have a lot of enterprises and organizations that are just stuck on this data only approach.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the data quality is an issue, and trusting the data also an issue in a lot of places. Yeah,
And it's interesting to think about, well, how did we get here? And it really has to do with like for years we've been going under the assumption of big data. The more data, the better. Just collect, collect. It's like almost a gluttonous, endeavor of just collecting as much data as possible. And then generative AI was like, oh, yay, like I need lots of data, right? It's just more. It's just a predictive model. It's a statistical predictive model. Now, what's happening, and this is like, I think where it comes full circle, is that now we're learning that symbolic and neurosymbolic AI, which is descriptive, contextualized, like knowledge graphs, taxonomies, those are all forms of symbolic AI. We are learning that generative AI is what we have. Symbolic AI is missing from the equation. It Because of these information systems, that's why we're starting to draw a little bit more attention, actually a lot more attention towards context engineering and taxonomies and ontologies, because that is symbolic AI. That it has been the little missing puzzle piece from this whole equation. And symbolic AI is not about more data, it's about quality and structured and context.
and the outcome of that makes AI information more reliable,
More reliable,
easy, less effort to surface what you're looking for, things like that.
explainable,
Yeah.
explainable, descriptive, contextualized, so less ambiguous. So an example I will throw out is when I was at Amazon, it was all of the seller support services, meaning anyone who sold anything on Amazon. they could be onboarding and trying to list their products, set up their account. Like you can imagine the workflows across, gosh, 98 countries at the time, 31 languages, all the documentation. And we had Seller University over here. We had, like it was just this massive space. And the documentation can shape shift and change depending on both language and country because you're dealing with legislation, regulations, and such. Like if you're selling in the EU, you're going to have VAT,
Right.
type. If you're selling in the US and only the US, you're not going to have VAT.
Mhm.
Um, and interestingly, and this was early on in AI days, we had access to almost every model to play with on the back end, which was fun. But within the documentation and in the Amazon spirit, Amazon has its own tool for sellers called Visa, all in caps. So you or I would be like, oh, Visa, like the payment, if you saw that in all in caps, you'd be like, that's the merchant services and payment system, credit card payment system. There were no definitions, there was no description. It was an Amazon created internal tool that we surfaced to sellers to help them calculate VAT. So Visa, the internal tool, was an Amazon tool to help sellers calculate VAT. So if you put that with no context into a system, Visa in all caps, your AI system is going to just assume it's Visa the payment system because it's been trained on the larger internet. Right. And so the only way to drive accuracy is you have to, within structured data, means it's encoded in the backend system, the concept with the GUID, its definition, all the different forms that term can be expressed as. It might be all the languages, who knows? But the idea is to help AI understand the difference because it doesn't know. Our assumption, we almost act as if it's this oracle or that somehow it's supposed to assume and know our domains without
Yeah,
giving it any context. And so that's the name of the game is like give it context relative to your space. Tell me what Visa is if it's not a payment, because there's no other way to know.
that's
Our
right.
customers don't know the difference because they're looking for this information. They may not even know that Visa, the VAT tool, exists.
There's a really famous common thing we say in product, naming things is hard. It's really
Hard. Very
hard.
hard. But then it's interesting because most of the people that are like, I don't want to bother, are the same people that will be like, I don't like that term. So
That's right.
it's like, don't be afraid or expect that I mean, those are all good signs of communication and pushback. It's again, language is political. Everyone's going to have an opinion. Our brains all work differently. So,
And we can test things. We have the ability to do lots of
yes,
rapid testing now that we didn't have even a year ago. So yeah,
exactly. And the
egos can be set aside.
Yep. And being able to test and to account, and that's what's so important is like I've worked in spaces where, what constitutes a valid or good test? How many customers and how many customer types do you need to account for? Who's your audience? Are you building for internal teams? Are you vetting things across, or is it your external customers? If so, how are you collecting feedback? Like I've been in environments where it was like 6 thumbs up equaled, yeah, we can build this feature, which was just like Qualtrics, six Qualtrics thumbs up. Well, yes, we're going ahead with this feature. Like, how do you? Like what are those? I don't see very well, just like we have evals on the back end. I see a place and I've seen some really great sort of evals for front end and UX type experiences that really are able to determine if the back end and front end are connected and working well together, for example.
Yeah, that is a beautiful aspirational goal we all have.
Yeah. It's up for the taking. Whoever is going to like go into that space and be the brave soul to like create benchmarks and evals and standardize. I mean, that's a great need
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I love that so much. Oh, Jessica, I could talk to you for hours. I really want to be respectful of your time because it feels like I'm gonna have to wait a really long time for your book. So I don't want to take up any extra time of yours because the work you're doing is so, so important. and so, so needed. And people are really paying close attention to what you're sharing publicly, what you're sharing in writing. And I just want to say, any way any of us can help you or amplify the work that you're doing, please let us know. Really grateful for your time. And I hope
Yep.
we can continue to amplify each other's work. And thank you so much. I will put links in the show notes to your blog. Where can people find you? I know you're teaching and
Yeah.
consulting.
I am going to be launching my new website hopefully in a couple weeks. As websites go, there's always, being a little bit of a website perfectionist, but I will be launching that and sharing a link. And then Substack and LinkedIn are really the best places. But I'd love to get feedback, and I'm going to have a place on my website where people can share their stories for the book site, because I really do want to be inclusive of voices. And there may be things just even from this podcast, it's like gives you a different lens and entry point into where information architecture and semantic engineering matters.
Yeah.
Um, we can all identify gaps and where this is much needed, but it's really based on experience. So I would love to hear from anyone.
Okay, great, Jessica. That's so smart. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And we'll be following your work closely.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Sure.